Friends, this morning as we continue our sermon series called Summer Fruit, we are speaking of the fruit called kindness. And again, I just want to remind you that in your bulletin is our Grow, Pray, Study guide for this week. We invite you to take that home with you and use it throughout the week to go a little bit deeper into this idea of kindness. And each one of the entries in here is one entry for each day, and so you can take a look at it. You don't have to do the whole thing in one fell swoop. Just take a look at it once a day. And so today I am sharing with you a passage from 2 Samuel chapter 9. This is actually part of the story of David and takes place after he has become king. It is one of those passages that perhaps some of you have not heard before, but it certainly is one that expresses this notion of kindness. So from 2 Samuel chapter 9. King David asked, "Is there anyone from Saul's family still alive that I could show faithful love for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant from Saul's household named Ziba, and he was summoned before David. "Are you Ziba?" the king asked him. "At your service," he answered. The king asked, "Is there anyone left from Saul's family that I could show God's kindness to?" "Yes," Ziba said to the king, "one of Jonathan's sons whose feet are crippled." "Where is he?" the king asked. "He is at the house of Amiel's son, Machir at Lodebar," Ziba told the king. So King David had him brought from the house of Amiel's son, Machir at Lodebar. Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, and Saul's grandson, came to David, and he fell to the ground, bowing low out of respect. "Mephibosheth," David said. "Yes," he replied, "I am at your service." "Don't be afraid," David told him, "because I will certainly show you faithful love for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the fields of your grandfather Saul, and you will eat at my table always." Mephibosheth bowed low out of respect and said, "Who am I, your servant, that you should care about a dead dog like me?" Then David summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything belonging to Saul and his family. You will work the land for him, you, your sons, and your servants. And you will bring food into your master's house for them to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will always be at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my master the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. All who lived in Ziba's household became Mephibosheth's servants. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was crippled in both feet. May God add wisdom to the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words. Anybody hungry? About a year ago, I was introduced to Kind bars by our son, and I found out that they were really quite tasty. But it wasn't until after I started eating them that I started paying attention to their commercials. One of them happens to say this: "People confuse nice and kind, but they're different. Nice tells you what you want to hear, but kind is honest. This bar is made with cranberries and almonds, so guess what? We call it cranberry almond. Give kind a try." Obviously, their purpose in their commercials is to get you to buy their Kind bars, right? But they do make a good point. There is a difference between nice and kind. And for them, and for us, kind is better. So what is the difference between nice and kind? Well, by definition, nice means pleasant and agreeable, whereas kind is having a generous and considerate nature. Clearly, there's a difference between those definitions, and yet so often we think that nice and kind are the same. Well, in our reading this morning from 2 Samuel, we see what it means to be kind. Reverend Dr. Richard Ezell, a pastor in South Carolina, summarized the story in this way. For years, he wrote, the half-crazed lunatic Saul had obsessively hunted David like big game. Now that Saul was dead, David had been crowned king of Israel. It was common practice in those days to exterminate all members of the previous dynasty to prevent any descendant from seeking the throne. As long as a spark of life from that family still smoldered, he goes on, it was a threat to the new king. Yet David's response was quite the contrary. He asked, is there anyone remaining from Saul's family that I can show kindness to because of Jonathan? Reverend Ezell points out that what David did was an act of compassion. It was more than just being nice. It was truly an act of kindness. In an instant, Mephibosheth, who was living in abject poverty, who had hidden himself in a remote and barren part of the kingdom that his grandfather had once ruled, he was transformed into a man of great worth, all because of King David's simple act of kindness. David's action was more than just a token gesture. It was considered an extravagant act toward a man who didn't deserve it, who could never earn it, and would never be able to repay it. Not only did David reinstate Mephibosheth's family wealth, thus giving him the source of support that he needed for the rest of his life, David raised him up to a position of importance within David's family. We read that in the scriptures when we heard no less than 4 times, "You will always eat meals at my table." Eating at the king's table was not a temporary honor. It meant that Mephibosheth was a member of David's family. He was a person of value. He was not like a dead dog. Instead of being a castaway, Mephibosheth was accepted. He felt the joy and the warmth of familial love and the contentment of knowing that someone cared about him. And that's the difference between nice and kind. We do something nice when we give a homeless man $1. But we do something kind when we invite him to join us for a meal at a restaurant. We do something nice when we smile at a young mother who is holding a crying baby, as if to say, it's okay, you'll figure it out eventually. But we do something kind when we offer to help her, to coach her on how she might comfort her child, or buy her the things that she needs for the child that perhaps she cannot afford. Kindness is more than simply being nice. It's being generous and considerate toward other people. It's doing something to benefit another without expecting anything in return. It's about doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And what's great about kindness is that it doesn't have to be extravagant. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be simple or even free. In the film Evan Almighty, newly elected Congressman Evan Baxter moves his family to Virginia so he can begin his term in office. During his campaign, he promised to change the world. So he prayed, asking God to help him, and that's when crazy things started to happen. The number 614 started appearing at wherever he went, and ancient tools and stacks of wood were delivered to his new home in Virginia. Pairs of animals started following him. It was all quite curious until he suddenly realized the significance of the number 614. It was the reference to Genesis 6:14, where God tells Noah to build an ark. And eventually, naturally, Evan rejects that idea. That is until God actually shows up, as we'll see in this movie clip.
So, you're really him, aren't you?
You want more proof? I haven't done the pillar of salt thing in a while.
That's all right, I believe you. I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
What? Why an ark? I mean, that's like flood territory. You wouldn't do that again. You wouldn't do that. Would you do that?
Let's just say that whatever I do because I love you.
Well, then you have to understand that this whole building an ark thing is really not part of my plans here. I need to settle into my house. I need to make a good impression at work. What?
Your plans.
What are you talking? We're talking about an ark, right? I mean, an ark? An ark is huge. I don't even know where I would begin.
Al, I hear that a lot. People want to change the world, don't know how to begin. You want to know how to change the world, son? One act of random kindness at a time. Build the ark. I'll tell you what, you build it, I'll fill it. And if anybody asks, tell them flood's coming. Oh, and you might need this.
Okay, so what do? I grab the wood. Oh, okay. That's just cruel. Do you see him? I don't see him.
Did you know that God's act of random kindness was to give water to a thirsty dog? Pretty simple, huh? Nothing has to be costly when it comes to kindness. In fact, God's ark was a random act of kindness, A-R-K, act of random kindness. And that, God says, at the end of the world is what we must do if we are going to change the world. We don't have to do something extravagant like adopting a foster child, although that would be really, really good and a very kind thing to do. No, an ark, an act of random kindness, could be something simple like giving water to a thirsty dog. Or it might be something in between, like inviting your neighbors to join you for dinner, or tutoring a child, or buying school supplies and giving them to the school that really needs them. Acts of random kindness show that we care enough to go out of our way to do something that benefits another part of God's creation. They are acts of compassion, acts that most resemble God. Unfortunately, though, being kind is not typical. It's not a typical part of our human nature. It's not in our nature to go out of our way to do something kind. Instead, we focus on looking out for the needs of number one, right? And we overlook the needs of others. Perhaps it's because we've become immune to all the people who are in need around us. Or maybe we think that the cost of being kind is way too high and we'll spend too much time or too much money, and we're not willing to pay that price. But when we consider the price that was paid by Jesus, by Christ himself, we realize that being kind cannot be avoided simply because of the cost. Jesus paid the ultimate price of kindness by giving his life and dying on the cross. And because he gave, we too must give, no matter what the cost is. Yes, kindness requires us to give a part of ourselves to someone else, to sacrifice a part of who we are or part of what we have. Kindness is not an inconvenience that is meant to be avoided. It's a characteristic that we are meant to embrace. It originates within the heart of God and becomes part of who we are through the work of the Holy Spirit. And as we grow in faith, kindness becomes part of our normal conduct as Christians because our character is connected to the character of God. We are meant to share kindness every single day. We are meant to build an ark, one act of random kindness at a time. Think of it this way. Every day we experience situations that have the potential to be explosive. They can ignite or dissolve depending upon how we respond. It's as if the situation were a very small fire and we are carrying 2 buckets, like the 2 buckets that are up on the screen. One bucket is filled with gasoline, the other is filled with water. Now, we get to choose which bucket we throw on the fire. We might choose to pour the gasoline on the fire and watch it grow, or even get out of control. Or we can choose the bucket of water and put the fire out. It's our choice. And depending upon the action we choose, we can either offer dignity or demoralize. We can either show acceptance or rejection. We can restore a person to wholeness or destroy them into pieces. We can demonstrate God's love through an act of random kindness, throwing on a simple bucket of water, or demonstrate indifference by ignoring a person in need. We can either share the grapes of kindness or choose to keep them for ourselves. King David made the choice to share kindness with Mephibosheth by building him up instead of tearing him down. David chose the bucket of water instead of gasoline. And when we are faced with potentially explosive situations, we too must choose, because we carry both buckets every day, one with gasoline and one with water. Which bucket will you choose? Amen.